Welcome, caregivers. This is the Empowered Caregiver Podcast, and I am your host, Valerie B. And today we are going to start a brand new series on dementia. And it's going to be called Dementia, Dignity, and Care. And this is very near and dear to my heart. It's really a personal story for me because my dad was diagnosed with vascular dementia and Alzheimer's, and he passed away in April a couple of years ago. So I am doing this in honor of him. And then I'm also doing it because there are so many caregivers and so many families and so many loved ones who really are dealing with this horrible disease. And I know you've heard about it because dementia is a horrible disease. And I remember when I was taking care of my dad that I saw some statistics that really made me sad. And those statistics were saying that by the year 2050 that there would be over 150 million people living with dementia. And that millions of families were going to be left trying to figure it out by themselves. But I don't believe that you have to be one of those families. I want to help you to navigate the journey before it even begins. But let me put this in perspective for you because I want to show you the impact that it really had on me at the time. In 2020, there were 55 million people diagnosed with dementia. But they said by 2030 that number was going to increase to 78 to 83 million. And then by 2050 to 150 plus million people. So that's another reason why we're talking about dementia today. Because behind every dementia diagnosis, there is a loved one who deserves dignity. Behind every dementia diagnosis, there's a caregiver who's really carrying a heavy load that nobody sees and nobody understands. Behind every dementia diagnosis, there's a family with a story. And that story is filled with love and filled with some grief and filled with lots of questions and even filled with moments that they don't know how to navigate. So on this month, I want to use this space to educate you, to encourage you, and to support those who are already walking this journey, those who are going to be walking this journey, and those who have already walked the journey. So if you're caring for someone who's living with dementia or you love someone who is, I want you to know that you are not alone and that your care matters, your compassion matters, your attention to detail matters, just showing up matters. Just a simple visit matters. Even if you don't know what to say or what to do, just show up because your presence matters. Not just to your loved one, but it matters to your family. It matters to yourself. So today we're going to start talking about dementia. And we're going to start talking about something that's very important, and that is those early signs of dementia that some families often miss. I mean, at first, it doesn't always look like dementia. Your loved one may have some symptoms, but it's not always dementia. It can look like repeated questions or misplaced items like misplacing your keys, mood changes, a little confusion, a story that your loved one tells 3 to 4 times in the same day. It is the same story. And because families love them so much, they just explain it away. And they say things like, oh, they've always been forgetful. or they're just tired, or they're just a little stressed, or they didn't get enough sleep last night, or they're just getting old. And sometimes that is true. But sometimes those little moments like that are the beginning of something bigger. And that's why today's conversation is going to matter, because noticing those signs early is very important, because it's not about putting a label on your loved one. It's not about you going into panic. It's not about disrespect. It really is about paying attention. Consistency. So let's talk about normal aging versus the possible warning signs of dementia. And let's be clear. Not every memory slip means that the person is going to be diagnosed with dementia or even Alzheimer's. Because as we age, it's normal to occasionally forget where we put our keys. I mean, it's normal to walk into a room and forget why we went in there. I do it all the time. It's normal to forget a name of a person for a moment and then remember it later. Because I always say, it's on the tip of my tongue. It's on the tip of my tongue, right? And that can happen to all of us. But dementia is usually more than occasional forgetfulness. Dementia begins to affect a person's ability to function every day. It affects their memory and their judgment, how they communicate, how they make decisions, and sometimes it affects their behavior. So instead of looking for just one isolated incident, it's better for families to just begin to ask some questions. Like, am I seeing a pattern here? Are these changes increasing or becoming more frequent? Is this affecting their daily life? Is it affecting their safety? And that's where families really do need to pay attention. So let's talk about the early signs that families often miss. And we're going to walk through some of those signs. One is your loved one repeating the same questions or telling the same stories over and over again. And this is one of the most common early signs of dementia and Alzheimer's. If your loved one is asking the same questions several times in a short period of time, that's a red flag. If they tell the same story over and over again and they don't realize that they've already shared that story, that's also a red flag. And it's not because they repeated themselves once, but it's because it becomes more frequent and it's becoming more noticeable. Another one is forgetting recent conversations. And maybe they can remember something from years ago. They even remember things from their childhood, but they can't remember something that you told them just a few hours ago. They forget appointments. They forget recent phone calls. They forget important discussions. So that's why it's so important for families to look for consistency, to look at frequency and how often this happens. Another warning sign is confusion with familiar routines. Maybe they've always paid the bills, but suddenly they get confused by the checkbook. Maybe they've cooked the same meal for years, and now they seem lost in what ingredients to use, where those ingredients are going to be found. They're lost in fixing the same meal that they fixed for years. Maybe they get mixed up with medications and dates and the steps in a normal routine for them. And when familiar tasks become difficult for them, that matters. Another sign is poor judgment or unusual decisions. And this is a big one. Because sometimes families first notice dementia through poor judgment, like their loved one is giving money away in unusual ways to complete strangers. They don't know why, they don't know who they gave it to, and they don't know what it was used for. Another one is falling for scams. And remember, scammers target elderly people all the time. I remember before I moved in with my dad that one day I visited him and he was on the phone with someone who was trying to get money from him. But instead of just getting the money from him, they asked for his social security number, his date of birth, and all of his personal information. When I walked through the door, my dad said to the guy on the other line, "My daughter is here and she can answer any questions that you may have." He immediately hung up. And then my dad was sitting there and he just starts crying and he says, "I don't know why I did that. I gave him my social security number. I gave him my personal information. I don't know why I did that. What is wrong with me?" And at that moment, I remembered how important it was to keep a person with dementia calm. So all I could say to him was, "Dad, it's okay. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. I'll take care of it." And then I immediately called all the credit bureaus, I froze his credit reports, and I locked his debit cards and credit cards and his bank accounts, everything. Another way that a loved one can use poor judgment is watch what they wear, because they could wear inappropriate clothes for the weather. Like my dad, he wore turtlenecks in the summer. When it was 100 degrees outside, he always kept the thermostat on 90 inside. Is your loved one leaving the stove on? Are they forgetting to lock the doors? Are they making unsafe choices that they normally wouldn't make? I know these changes can be subtle at first, but they're really important. And then another one is personality or mood changes. Sometimes dementia doesn't first show up as memory problems. Sometimes it shows up as increased irritability. They're more suspicious and paranoid than usual, because my dad always thought someone was stealing his wallet, took his money. It shows up as frustration, sometimes mood swings. Families will begin to notice that a loved one who was once easygoing suddenly becomes short-tempered. Or a loved one who used to be social is now withdrawn. Or even a loved one who was confident seems easily overwhelmed now. And families all sometimes miss this. They often miss it because they think it's just stress or anxiety or old age or lack of sleep. And sometimes maybe it is. But it's all worth paying attention to and noticing. And then another warning sign is your loved one gets lost or they get disoriented in familiar places. And this is a really important warning sign as well, because if someone, let's say your loved one is still driving, if they become confused while they're driving a route that they've known for years, that's a red flag. I remember driving my dad on the same route, and he was confused because he said it looked different. He didn't recognize the street. Some days he remembered, some days he didn't. Or your loved one may get turned around in familiar places. That deserves attention. I remember taking my dad to a church that his brother pastored for over 30 years. He had no clue. He did not know. He did not recognize the church or even the area. And when your loved one gets lost or they're disoriented, that can become a serious safety issue. And families need to address it. Next, we're going to talk about why families miss the signs. Because we talked about some of the signs, but there are some specific reasons why families just miss these signs. And they don't miss them because they don't care. They miss them because they do care, but they're just not ready to face it. Sometimes a family misses the signs because they're scared. They're in denial. They don't want to believe that their loved one is changing. They don't want to overreact, and they just want to hope that the person is just aging. And it's interesting because my dad thought that his unusual behavior and the challenges in his health were all because of old age. And my brother and I made a decision that we were not going to tell our dad that he had dementia, because we first didn't know how he was going to react. And then second, we knew the moment we told him he was going to forget. So why tell him? And that was our decision. You know your loved one better than anyone else. So you decide when and if you want to tell your loved one that they have dementia. But let's be honest. With a dementia diagnosis, there does come change. And sometimes we don't want our world to change. Because once we admit that something just might be wrong, that they might just have dementia or they might have Alzheimer's, it can feel like life is asking you to just step into a role that you didn't want and that you weren't ready for and that you weren't qualified for. That role of caregiver, advocate, and decision maker, power of attorney. And all of those things are a lot. And we have to wrap our minds around them. A caregiver needs to wrap your mind around that. And please don't minimize the signs that you see, because early action really matters. Early recognition really, really does matter, because when changes are noticed sooner, then families are able to schedule a medical evaluation much sooner. They can rule out other possible causes. They can start documenting some symptoms. They can plan for safety. They can put in cameras. They can readjust the home of the loved one to make sure they don't fall or have any other risk, safety risk. They can get to an elder care attorney early and get some documents filled out, power of attorney and whatever other documents are necessary. And then a family can even explore support resources when they know sooner. And remember that every memory problem is not going to be dementia or Alzheimer's. I know confusion comes with dementia, but sometimes even confusion can be caused by other things. It could be caused by side effects from medications. It could be caused by an infection, let's say a urinary tract infection. It could be caused by dehydration or even vitamin deficiencies, maybe sleep issues, maybe stress and anxiety, maybe another medical condition. And that's why evaluation matters. Because a family should never jump to conclusions or make assumptions about anything. It's important to just ask questions, and the things that you can't get answers to, research it. Research it. And I want to take a moment to do a caregiver check-in. It's called the Dementia Red Flag Reflection Check-in. And this is for the caregiver who has some idea that their loved one may be diagnosed with dementia. Or they're seeing some of the early signs. They're seeing some warning signs. But I want to check in with you and just tell you to ask yourself a few questions. Think about it. Has your loved one started repeating the same questions or even telling the same stories more often? Have you noticed that your loved one is more confused about dates, about appointments, about familiar routines? Has your loved one's mood changed? How about their personality? Has it changed noticeably? Has your loved one made unusual decisions involving money and safety? And have you been minimizing the signs because you're afraid of what the signs might mean? And if you answered yes to several of these questions, then I want you to not panic. It may be a reason to start documenting what you're seeing and what you're observing. And then you could begin to have a conversation with a medical professional. And I know this conversation was tough for some people. And it feels personal, I know. And your heart may just be a little heavy right now. And I know you're realizing that you may have seen some signs and you didn't really understand them before, but now you understand them a little bit better. Then what I want you to do is just give yourself some grace. Because so many families look back and they say, I wish I'd known this sooner. I thought it was just old age. I thought it was stress. I thought that it was their lack of sleep. I didn't realize what I was seeing. And that's a very human response. And just remember that awareness gives you power. It gives you the opportunity to respond and to prepare. And that matters. And you don't have to become an expert overnight. You don't have to solve everything today. For this week, your only job may just be to just observe. It may be just to write things down. It may be just to notice some patterns. It may be just to pay attention and not panic. Because that's a very good, strong, and loving first step that you're going to be able to make. And noticing the signs is paying attention. And if this episode spoke to your heart, then I want you to share it with a sibling. Share it with a spouse. Share it with another family member or another caregiver who may be in the early stages of observing their loved one to see whether they have dementia. And when you can't get all of your questions answered, do some research. My mom taught us to research everything. We researched medications, their side effects, procedures, diagnosis. We researched hospitals, doctors. We researched everything. So remember that as a caregiver, you're not going to get all of the answers that you're looking for from your physician or from other people who are professionals. So do some research. And if you're beginning to notice changes in someone that you love, then I encourage you to just start a journal. Start your journal this week. Start writing some things down. Write down what happened. Write down when it happened. Write down how often it's happening and write down any safety concerns that you notice. And this can help you to see patterns more clearly. And this can also help you when you go speak to the doctor. Because believe it or not, there are still some doctors who will tell you that it's still old age no matter what you observe. So having that journal is going to be very helpful. And if you're walking this dementia journey right now, remember that you don't have to carry this alone. You have a support system. Research your resources. Find out how you can get the help and get some assistance because you have time to prepare. So thank you for being here with me today. This is the Empowered Caregiver Podcast. And this has been the very first episode in our Dementia, Dignity, and Care April series. So until next time, take care of yourself as you take care of your loved one.